Good afternoon. Well, after 6 weeks, more than 20 witnesses and hours of testimony, Donald Trump has entered the history books, becoming the first former US president ever to be convicted on criminal charges. Mr. Trump was found to have falsified business records, to have hidden money paid to adult film star Stormy Daniels ahead of the 2016 election, in an effort to keep her quiet about an alleged sexual encounter. The former president is now facing the prospect of up to 4 years behind bars. Let's go live to US correspondent Catherine Firkin, who's outside court in New York. And Catherine, this truly is a landmark moment in US history.
Yeah, it certainly is, Ange. To hear that word guilty not just once, but 34 times against a former US president was just absolutely extraordinary. And there's no doubt that we are now in totally uncharted territory. We're now in a situation where a convicted felon, a man who has been found guilty of multiple crimes, is running for the White House. And the gravity of that really just can't be overstated. Now, to recap how we got to this point, of course, we had the trial last about 6 weeks. And during that time, we heard some pretty graphic testimony from porn star Stormy Daniels about her alleged sexual encounter with Donald Trump. Now, I'm using that word alleged still because it's important to note that that's not what this trial was working to prove or disprove. This was all about whether Trump falsified business records to hide payments to Ms. Daniels, essentially to keep her quiet during the 2016 presidential election campaign. We also heard some pretty intense testimony from former Trump lawyer Michael Cohen. He really was the star witness in the prosecution's case. He was the only one who was able to directly tie Trump to that hush money payment, and certainly his testimony appears to have resonated with the jury because we've reached this extraordinary verdict where Trump has been found guilty on all 34 counts. And just moments after that verdict was handed down, Trump spoke to the media outside court. Here's what he had to say.
This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. They wouldn't give us a venue change. We were at 5% or 6% in this district, in this area. This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. But the real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people, and they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here. You have a Soros-backed DA, and the whole thing, we didn't do a thing wrong. I'm a very innocent man, and it's okay. I'm fighting for our country. I'm fighting for our Constitution. Our whole country is being rigged right now. This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent. And I think it's just a disgrace. And we'll keep fighting. We'll fight till the end and we'll win, because our country's gone to hell. We don't have the same country anymore. We have a divided mess. We're a nation in decline, serious decline. Millions and millions of people pouring into our country right now from prisons and from mental institutions, terrorists, and they're taking over our country. We have a country that's in big trouble.
Now, I'm sure you'll agree that much of that language from Donald Trump was pretty familiar. Right from the start, he's been saying that this is a rigged trial, that the judge is corrupt, that the entire system is against him. But of course, there's absolutely no evidence to support any of those claims. In fact, we saw a really intensive search for jurors that involved both the prosecution and defence as usual. So really, Trump has simply been judged by his peers, just as anyone else would be in a trial of this nature. It was also notable to hear Trump say that he's continuing to fight for the country. That suggests that he's going to continue to use this trial and this verdict to paint himself as something of a victim, perhaps even a martyr to the cause. That does seem to be resonating with Trump supporters at the moment, but whether that carries through to the election is really yet to be known. What we do know is that Trump is appealing this verdict. We also know that sentencing is set to happen on July 11. Trump faces up to 4 years behind behind bars, but most legal experts agree it's more likely he receives a sentence of probation without jail time. So for the moment, Ange, we are just in this absolutely extraordinary situation where Americans now have to decide, regardless of their politics, do they want to send a convicted felon back to the White House?
Thanks, Catherine. US correspondent Catherine Firkin there, live from New York. Donald Trump now faces the prospect of jail after being found guilty of 34 counts in his hush money trial. Our CBS colleague Norah O'Donnell has more.
I'm joined now by the best political and legal team in the business. Major Garrett is our CBS chief Washington correspondent, Jan Crawford, our chief legal correspondent. But let's start with Caroline Polisi, criminal defense attorney. Caroline, first, does the defense have grounds for appeal?
Nora, there are a lot of meritorious issues here, not the least of which is really the law, the statute on which the district attorney brought this case. Remember, we have talked for weeks now about the unique nature of what they had to prove in that this was a misdemeanor offense that they bumped up to a felony with another misdemeanor, the conspiracy to violate state election laws, and the unlawful means through which that conspiracy was achieved. The state did not have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, nor did the jury need to be unanimous with respect to what they thought the unlawful means were. To be clear, they were unanimous with respect to every element of the charged offense here, but I think you will see some due process issues being raised on appeal.
And Caroline, Donald Trump is a 77-year-old first-time offender in the eyes of the New York court system. Judge Merchan has a great deal of discretion. Do you think he'll sentence Donald Trump to prison?
I do not, Nora. For better or for worse, he is being treated not above the law, just as any other New Yorker would be in this situation. The fact is, the vast majority of defendants that are sentenced under this statute do not serve prison time. It is on the table up to 4 years. However, I do not see Judge Merchan imposing prison sentence in this instance because he is a first-time offender. It's a nonviolent offense. And the fact is that most defendants in his position would not be sentenced to prison time.
And Caroline, we do know that a convicted felon can become president of the United States, but how could probation complicate his campaigning?
It could complicate things quite a bit. If he is placed on, specific probation, he will have to sign off with his probation officer on his travel plans. And that likely is not something that the former president is used to. But again, just as I said, he will have to partake in this system just as any other criminal defendant would.
Caroline Polisi, thank you for your expertise. Let's now bring in Major and Jan. Major, this was a legal issue today, but we can't underestimate the political repercussions.
Words really fail us, Nora. There's nothing you can say or Jan can say or I can say that can adequately capture the gravity of this moment. This is terrain the country has never before seen. And it's going to create for the 2024 campaign a question never before asked. Why are we here? Former President Trump will say, we are here because there is a system arrayed against one person in America and one person only, me. And he will use that grievance to say to a wide swath of this country, if not for this system, he calls it the deep state, or some Democrats or enemies, or sometimes vermin, I would never be in this position. Another part of that question will be, wait a minute, doesn't your conduct have something to do with this? Doesn't your conduct, former President Trump, have something to do with why we are going through all of these stomach-turning legal problems, whether it's January 6th, classified documents, a conspiracy to hide information, buy and sell stories favorable to you in 2016? Isn't it your conduct that is central to why we are going through all these shockwaves to our institutions? That is going to be a question asked and answered in a way we've never had in a presidential campaign before.
But Donald Trump said this will ultimately be decided at the ballot box.
Precisely. The country will decide, will render a verdict politically on that central question. Why are we here?
And Jan Crawford, we don't know yet whether this is the only criminal trial that Donald Trump will face this year. It's likely it could be, but there are some issues before the Supreme Court, and we could get a decision in June. Tell us about that.
Well, those are two of the cases before the court now involving former President Trump, and they go to whether or not and how he can be prosecuted for his actions around January 6th and his efforts to allegedly obstruct the 2020 election. Of course, special counsel Jack Smith has charged former President Trump and is seeking to prosecute him and has asked the Supreme Court for a decision conviction in that case in June, so he can try it potentially before the election. The issue is whether Trump is immune from prosecution. I don't think, based on the arguments, the Supreme Court will say he is, but I do think this verdict today and this conviction lessens the pressure on the Supreme Court in those cases.
Supreme Court in June, the sentencing July 11th, the Republican convention July 15th, the Democrats' convention in August. It will be quite a summer.
Oh, by the way, Nora, the president's son on trial starting Monday. The president's son on trial starting Monday, a former president convicted on the Thursday before. We are in brand new space, America.
We will be watching.
Well, let's return to our lead story today. Donald Trump is a convicted felon. A jury has found him guilty of all 34 charges relating to hush money paid to the adult film star Stormy Daniels. So what does it mean for Trump's election prospects in November? Let's bring in our national affairs editor, Hugh Remington. This has never happened before, Hugh. Can a convicted criminal make it to the White House?
Oddly, there's nothing in the US Constitution that says that it can't happen. And so there's one statement from Donald Trump today that I think everyone can agree with, and that is that the real verdict will come on November the 5th this year, and it will be made by the people. Excuse me. There have been some US polling outfits in recent weeks that have asked people what effect a conviction might have on their voting intentions. Of course, that question put before today's results. Now, 11 to 14% say it could change their vote away from Trump, but that is a big could. And there is no indication that those Trump supporters, if they were to turn away from Trump now, would go on and vote for Biden, because, of course, in the United States, it's not compulsory. They can go and just do something else on November the 5th. Trump has been narrowly, consistently leading in all the polls during the course of this year. There is nothing to suggest now, 5 months out from the election, that this is necessarily fatal to his prospects.
Now, he's facing some other charges too, possibly, is that right?
Yeah, so the hush money case, in many ways, is the most trivial of the matters that have been brought before him. Some Trump supporters, of course, say it's too trivial to have been brought in the first place. But he still faces 2 other federal matters and 1 state matter. The most important probably is the federal question, the charges that relate to the January 6th insurrection that we saw at Capitol Hill and Trump's role in allegedly inciting his supporters to go up to the Capitol Hill and to take over essentially the heart of the American democratic process there where the Congress and the Senate sit. He's also facing a state criminal case which relates to the state of Georgia and his alleged attempts there to try and overturn the results in the state of Georgia, which would be critical to the outcome of the 2020 election. And there's also another federal case against him which relates to how he handled classified documents, how they wound up at Mar-a-Lago, his Florida residence, after he left the White House.
So we're still waiting for news on Trump's sentencing on the hush money charges. Could he go to prison?
This is an interesting question because those who are hostile to Trump say that there are things that are against him which would indicate on 34 felony charges that he could be a case for imprisonment. One is he showed no remorse. During the course of the trial, he was several times warned by the judge about being in contempt. But Trump's own attorney points out that he is a 77-year-old man. He has no previous criminal history, and no one else other than Donald Trump would have even been suggested that a 77-year-old man with no previous criminal history would go to jail. On the remote chance he was incarcerated, it couldn't be in a general prison population for the very obvious reason of the risk that might befall them inside.
Certainly an historic day.
It's a big day.
However you look at it. Our National Affairs editor, Hugh Remington, thank you very much.
Pleasure.